Okay. So today is the Habitat Privacy Talks. Invited Mr. Risto from the Estonia. I'm very pleased to talk with him. He's an expert in privacy protections. They're also familiar with the Estonia's e-government. Today I try to look into this situation, what's happened in Estonia. They also have it in a more specific directions where we go based on the data protections. So yeah, let's start the interviews, Mr. Risto. So please introduce about yourself in the background to the listeners.
Okay, thank you very much, Kohei-san. It's a pleasure to be in your interview. So my name is Risto Hübner. I'm an attorney, practicing attorney from Estonia, from Tallinn, working in my own law firm, Nordx Legal. This law firm is a small boutique law firm, which is focused primarily on data protection and privacy related issues, specifically the GDPR. And what we do in practice is we help all kind of companies, not only from Estonia, but across the world, including lately more and more from Japan, on topics such as how to comply with the GDPR when you're, for instance, an e-commerce platform, if you're a video game developer, if you're a telecom company, software service provider, and so on. Actually, this IT law is our main focus area from the beginning. And as I said, that recently there have been growing interest from Japan on how to comply with the GDPR, and this is in that respect very interesting to have this discussion with you, specifically as Japan has there has been this kind of uptake in the interest on those topics, on how to approach the European requirements when you are a Japanese company.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that is very amazing. I think a lot of the Japanese company wants to know more about the data protection, especially the GDPR based, the compliances. There also a lot of the government related activity. Estonia is the one of the upcoming discussion. In particular, the digital government has been a very important actions in Japan and the situations in the coronavirus. We need more digital access to the public services. So I think in a lot of the company has been started on the business, in particular like the startups. Of course, not only for the Estonia, but I think the North Europe is the one of the promising area in the GDPR startup things. So what kind of the startups is like the margin in Estonia related to the privacy protection of GDPR right this moment?
You mean the impact of GDPR on startups? What is the impact?
Is like once the GDPR is started, any startups is coming for the data protections?
Oh yeah. In general, there is of course startups that are focused on data protection and privacy and to provide a service out of it to make it as a product. But this we haven't seen happening in Estonia. There are only few companies which are focusing on that, and actually our own law firm is currently in process of automating the legal services so that specific areas concerning the GDPR can be productized and can be automated. You don't need to deal with them anymore manually. But in general, the impact of GDPR on startups has been very, very significant. And based on our experience, what is actually a very interesting trend is that, for instance, investors in startups like VC firms, they have approached law firms, including us, asking that law firms can help startups with GDPR compliance, because GDPR compliance for startups has become a very, very major risk factor. Because if obviously if you haven't done anything, is a huge red flag for investors, for investment. Especially if the startup is highly data intensive business with lots of data. Sometimes millions and millions of people's data are processed. So this is one of the trends that actually startups themselves don't approach because there's lack of awareness, but very often they are investors approach that could you do something. The other aspect maybe interesting to mention is that when we talk of the GDPR and startups, is that the startups very often from day one need to start with the GDPR, because if they want to onboard their first clients, and especially if the client happens to be some multinational big enterprise, these clients will immediately ask, like, what kind of measures have you taken to comply with the GDPR? Because if the startup is offering some services as a processor in the meaning of the GDPR, then their clients, those B2B clients, they cannot actually engage them without doing this kind of due diligence on them, on their level of compliance. So in that respect, this request comes from the clients themselves, and we have seen situations that for some startups they haven't been able to start their business before they negotiate data processing agreements for months and put in place the main required documents like privacy policy, records of processing activities, and so on. So yeah, this is a very huge impact, and nobody can really escape it these days. And maybe finally, the also interesting aspect to mention is that for many startups that have taken this topic very seriously, it has become a kind of a reputation and trust issue, that they try to really focus on GDPR compliance to use it as kind of a competitive advantage. There are still some statistics that saying which refer that many companies still don't see it as a competitive advantage and see the GDPR as kind of a hindrance to innovation. But I think that this trend is more and more changing, because actually GDPR also provides an opportunity to optimize business processes. And maybe also from the startups point of view, it's very important to mention that startups actually are in a very good position, because they can basically start the GDPR compliance from a clean slate. They don't have any legacy systems. They don't have any kind of bureaucracy in the enterprise. And it's easy to build up the compliance framework step by step, as opposed to large enterprises that will need to spend years to become GDPR compliant and invest enormous amounts of money in this compliance. So yeah, this is so startups should really start early, and it's actually for their advantage, so that they don't have any legacy there.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting point. Here in Japan, is also a lot of the big company is struggling. A lot of data they have it, but the problem is they haven't control everything. And for the startups, it's an advantage. Just making a quick change the system, the business, the accordance with the new rules or new requirement. I suppose that you they indicated the importance of the legal approach in advance for starting the new things. So you have started the Estonian chapters of the legal hackers. I think it's been a community for the legal experts related to the technologies. So why did you start these communities? Also, what is the purpose for that?
So maybe a few words about the legal hackers in general. Legal hackers is a global legal innovation community which started from the US, and I by pure accident noticed this community's development sometime around 2015. At the time, it wasn't very big yet. There were many chapters around the world, but not only few chapters in Europe. Still at the time, I think, and now basically it has grown to have chapters all across the world. I'm not sure about Japan, but it's probably now almost in most of the countries represented. In some countries, there are several chapters. And what it is really about, it's a kind of a voluntary legal innovation movement, which not only deals with law, but also specifically intersection of law, business and technology, and all kind of legal, tech, legal innovation topics. So there are meetups which are happening regularly on those topics. There are hackathons, conferences, all kind of activities. And in Estonia, there was not much discussion about legal tech and innovation still a few years ago. So we thought that it would be good to somehow ignite this discussion, and that's the reason why we decided to start it in Estonia as well. Yeah, and basically, yeah, it has covered a wide variety of topics, including data protection, including blockchain, including artificial intelligence, and how all those topics relate to law. So this is the main focus.
Yeah, that's great initiatives. Here is also isn't necessary just combining the hybrid, the expertise, just not only for the legal capacities, but also they need to include the more tech orientation.
Exactly, and that's one of the main purposes that to bring together people from different disciplines, whether they are just a business background, whether it's IT background, whether it's legal or sales, marketing, whatever. Because putting those people together in one room, then the innovation starts to happen and discussion starts to get interesting. Because historically, lawyers did not talk too much to software developers or the other way around. So if we unite these people, then we see that new services and products are being developed, and lots of innovation can come out of it. But of course, there are many topics also a part of legal tech or that are on the focus of this movement, like general how to facilitate access to justice, or how to make the data more open for reuse by everyone, and so on. So it's a kind of a very wide approach taken by the legal hackers community globally. And this is actually also maybe a good moment to say that if there is no chapter in Japan yet, then it would be really great if somebody would set up one in Japan as well. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds great. I hope they have the same in Japan as well. So the next question is just to move to the e-government. I think the Estonia is one of the fastest, they also advanced digital government, the services, and also the infrastructures. The Japanese government is trying to imitate the similar approach. The other countries is also the following that. But I'm wondering, is in the digital government, I think they need to comply with the data protection as well under the GDPR, which has been a very strict situations. So how the Estonian government is paying attention to the data protection, as well as how they are making any method to be more preventing for the citizens.
I think that maybe in this regard, it would be good to just very briefly to mention few of the main building blocks of Estonian digital society, so to say. Because indeed, it's true that Estonia is very often referred to as one of the most advanced countries when it comes to e-governance, if not the most advanced. And why this is possible, and why it all also is related to how the data is protected and secured, is how the e-government has been built. And in this regard, I would like to refer specifically to two main building blocks. Of course, there are many of those, but these are the crucial ones. The first one is called X-Road, which is kind of the digital backbone for the e-state. It links together the Estonian public and private e-service IT systems. It's meaning that Estonia doesn't have a centralized database. All the different databases are kept separate, but are linked together through this kind of system. And this is highly secure. It is basically all the outgoing data is digitally signed and encrypted on this data layer, and all incoming data is authenticated and logged. And also for Estonians, if anybody, Estonian citizens, for instance, they can log into the state information system, they can actually look and see who has looked into their data. For instance, if somebody has inquired about themselves from the population register, or you can see which doctor has looked into your medical data, and everything is logged in the system. That's how the that's the underlying approach, that there is a very transparent system, transparency, security, and these are like the building blocks for this X-Road and the security part of it. So also maybe in terms of security and data security, there is Estonia was the first country actually in the world which started to use blockchain technology in this public information systems, and it's called KSI blockchain, developed by a company called Guardtime, and now it is used across the world by many companies, and I also think some other governments. And basically, many information systems are connected to this. So this is another layer of security included. But what I also wanted to mention is the electronic ID and the digital signature that Estonia has. So again, probably this is something very common now these days in many countries, but in Estonia, this was started to be used already in 2002, which is basically 20 years ago. So it was possible to digitally sign all contracts with ID cards. Of course, these days we have, in addition, mobile ID, also smart ID applications, which allow for digital signatures, and also it is possible to use for authentication purposes. And where also it very much started to like spread in Estonia is that it was made mandatory. As far as I know, Finland has also an ID card system, but it was never made mandatory. So the Estonian advantage was that the system was made mandatory, which means that many people among the population started to use it. Then there were e-banking services, all the government services put online. So it all together created this ecosystem, which facilitated the wide-scale adoption of those new technologies, and of course also facilitates the security and transparency in terms of handling the data. This is very briefly some of the building blocks and aspects about how the Estonian e-government works, but of course there are lots of aspects to it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's a very systematic data protection. So my next question is, I saw that there's some news like in Estonia has been hacked. I guess it's in late of the 2000. If I'm made along, I want to revise it, but it is supposed to be then even Estonia is with a very protective approach, but there's some hacking incident that might be happens in the digital system. I think technology is sometimes not imperfect. So is there any privacy incident so far in Estonia, or any criminal things has happened there?
Yeah, actually, there are those discussions, of course, constantly. Like, how secure is this kind of very highly digitalized country or state? That if everything, all the data is somewhere on the cloud, connected, the systems are all connected, and so on. There are those discussions constantly, and there have been some technical and security issues. For instance, recently there was an issue with the chip on the Estonian ID card, but it was a kind of a national emergency action which was taken very fast, and this issue was fixed. So in that sense, of course, when country is highly digitalized, it creates lots of transparency and new possibilities and efficiencies, but it creates also potential, of course, risk in terms of data security in general. Like, how do you keep the systems up to date so that as the technology advances, also the technology is improved in the e-government side, and part of the problem with the Estonian ID cards recently, of course, maybe you have heard, in 2008 there was also this kind of a nationwide attack on Estonian e-government information systems, but actually which was thought to be coming from Russia, but on the other hand, this actually very much also ignited the development of additional security in all the different layers of Estonian e-government, and also the NATO cybersecurity center has been established in Estonia after those incidents. And Estonia has become also one of the centers in Europe dealing with topics around cybersecurity. So indeed the risks are there, but Estonia is also extremely heavily investing specifically on topics such as cybersecurity, how to protect the data when everything is online. And just another example, which could be also considered as one of the steps in the Estonian e-government roadmap, is the digital data embassies, that the Estonian state information systems data, which is online, is backed up in the data centers in Luxembourg. So let's say that if Estonia, there is a physical attack on Estonia, then the country as such can still function. All the data will still be backed up in data centers outside of Estonia. And why this is important? Because, for instance, Estonia has of course, as I said, all the registers are online, but let's take just an example: the land register. Who owns what kind of land where? This is in a separate database, separate register, and all this data is backed up. So even if there is a war in Estonia, this kind of data cannot be corrupted, messed up. It is backed up in a different country. So yeah, these are the different aspects, and cybersecurity is definitely very, very important aspect where Estonia is investing heavily.
Yeah, I heard about it. In Estonia has been invested a lot. The infrastructures, also the security models, which is the very great part that we can replicate things to other government. In Japan has been very vulnerable, so the problems here. So the next question is that you are the legal expert. I think a lot of the listener want to know more about the pre and after GDPR, what the change, the legal matters. So through the GDPR, the government enterprise need to be changed any stance of the data protection and data privacy.
Yes, I mean, GDPR has impact not only on the private sector, but also the public sector. There are, of course, some differences there, including on how the different EU countries have approached in terms of sanctioning public entities. For instance, can you fine or not? Because one of the topics, as everybody knows, is the high fines introduced by the GDPR. But in general, it doesn't matter if you're a public sector or the private sector, you need to follow the GDPR requirements. So there is a significant impact on that, definitely in all sectors. But maybe what might be interesting for especially Japanese companies is that Japanese companies can become very easily subject to GDPR because the territorial scope under the GDPR has been significantly widened, and there is so-called extraterritorial effect in certain circumstances. So, of course, the main criterion how the GDPR applies is related to the establishment. Any company established in the EU, irrespective of where the data is being processed, is subject to the GDPR, and the concept of establishment can be very widely interpreted. But now where the relevance to non-EU companies, including Japanese companies, comes in is the so-called targeting criterion. And basically what it means that, let's say, if we take a Japanese company which is offering goods or services to individuals in the EU, then already GDPR might apply to that company. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, if a Japanese company is carrying out any monitoring of the behavior of EU data subjects, the individuals, as long as the behavior takes place in the EU, again, the Japanese company can be subject to GDPR. And an example of this is, for instance, using cookies and online tracking technologies on all kind of online business websites. For instance, if you have an e-commerce platform in Japan and you are analyzing all the traffic, collecting all kind of data, geolocation, IP addresses, doing further analysis on that, then the GDPR might apply to a Japanese company, and Japanese company should put in place the relevant processes how to comply, including appointing a EU representative in probably most cases, because there are some exceptions, but most likely for this kind of online tracking with cookies or other tracking technologies such as fingerprinting, for instance, the exceptions don't apply. So there are lots of requirements that Japanese companies should consider in light of the GDPR.
I see. Yeah. So the many Japanese companies started to worry about the data protection, in particular the GDPR has been the past since almost 2 years. It's almost the lot of the European company has started to be be pointed out. The lot of the enterprise has not been comply with the GDPR protection. So the same things will be adapted to the foreign companies. Besides the tech companies, the many company has been a lot of the data. In that case, they have to be they change their practice. So this is a very big impact in futures. So lastly, please give any message to the listeners, mostly maybe the Japanese people, the Japanese companies interested in the GDPR or any topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the main message for Japanese companies in respect of the GDPR would be that since GDPR is very complex level of regulation and there are very many different aspects involved, it would be first very important to actually do the analysis of to what extent GDPR applies. Because let's say if we take a large enterprise, then there can be very many different business lines under that enterprise, and only some of them might be impacted by the GDPR. So why it is important to decide is that depending on the scope of applicability, the next steps should be put in place, like how far the company goes, whether it voluntarily follows all the GDPR requirements for its entire business to make it to take this kind of conservative approach and follow the EU requirements, or it only applies the GDPR to those specific processing activities which are directly impacted by the GDPR. And for large enterprises, it can make a huge difference in terms of how they deal with it. And to do this kind of initial analysis, it would be very important to analyze the data flows, to do the data mapping of what kind of data is processed, for what purposes, on what grounds, and so on. And that would help Japanese companies to determine the next steps, because it can make a huge difference in terms of time and investment needed on how to approach this, or in terms of scope.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for having the interviews and great insight from your side. Then, yeah, let's move on. That the GDPR is the upcoming topics. There are also the Japanese new law will be enacted in soon. So we have to consider the data protection first, or the utilities, the safety for the data societies. Oh, thank you for having this time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.